Sartre exposed Why Women Fear Men Who Don't Need Them, Paris, 1943. The Nazi occupation has turned the City of Light into a shadow of itself. In a small, smoke-filled café in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Jean-Paul Sartre sits alone, writing furiously. But he's not writing about the war, or resistance, or freedom in the political sense. He's documenting something far more controversial, a discovery about human relationships that would shake the very foundation of how we understand attraction, power, and love. What Sartre discovered that night would later be buried by feminists, misunderstood by pickup artists, and completely ignored by mainstream psychology. Yet it explains why the most confident, self-sufficient men often find themselves surrounded by women who simultaneously desire and fear them. It explains why neediness repels, why desperation creates disgust, and why the moment a man stops needing female validation, he becomes dangerously attractive. The discovery began with Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre's lifelong partner and intellectual equal. Their relationship was unlike anything the world had seen. Two brilliant minds who chose each other, not out of desperation or social convention, but out of genuine intellectual and emotional connection. But what made their relationship so powerful wasn't what brought them together. It was what didn't. Sartre had achieved something that most men never do: complete emotional independence. He didn't need Simone's approval to feel worthy. He didn't need her presence to feel complete. He didn't need her love to validate his existence. This terrified and attracted her in equal measure, creating a dynamic that would define not just their relationship, but Sartre's entire philosophical understanding of human connection. You see, what Sartre realized, what he wrote about in his private journals but never fully published, was that women don't actually want to be needed in the way most men think they do. They want to be chosen. And there's a massive difference between being needed and being chosen. When a man needs a woman for validation, for emotional stability, for a sense of worth, he places her in the position of his mother. He makes her responsible for his emotional well-being. This creates what Sartre called the burden of necessity, a psychological weight that slowly crushes attraction and breeds resentment. But when a man chooses a woman from a place of abundance and emotional independence, something magical happens. She becomes free to be herself rather than his emotional caretaker. She can express her femininity without worrying about managing his fragile ego. She can challenge him, disagree with him, even leave him, because she knows he'll survive without her. This freedom, Sartre discovered, is what women truly crave. Not to be needed like a drug by an addict, but to be chosen like a masterpiece by a collector who appreciates beauty but doesn't need to possess it to feel valuable. The realization came to Sartre during one of his many conversations with Simone about their open relationship. They had agreed that both could have affairs with other people, but what fascinated Sartre wasn't the sexual freedom. It was Simone's reaction to his emotional independence. The more indifferent he became to her, other relationships, the more intensely she desired him. The less he demanded her exclusive attention, the more freely she gave it. The moment he stopped trying to control or possess her, she chose to stay with him for over 50 years. This led Sartre to a disturbing conclusion. Most relationships are built on mutual dependency rather than mutual choice. Men become addicted to female validation, and women become addicted to being needed. Both parties trap each other in a prison of false intimacy that masquerades as love, but is actually just sophisticated emotional manipulation. Here's where it gets controversial and why this discovery was buried. Sartre realized that when a man achieves true emotional independence, it exposes every woman's deepest fear, that she might not actually be as necessary as she thought. That her value doesn't come from being needed, but from being genuinely wanted. This fear manifests in fascinating ways. Independent men often find that women test them more aggressively, challenge them more intensely, and push their boundaries more consistently than they do with needy men. It's not because they don't like these men, it's because they're trying to find the crack in their armor, the place where desperation might leak through. The testing serves a dual purpose. It confirms that the man's independence is real, and it provides the emotional drama that many women have been conditioned to associate with passion. A man who remains calm, centered, and unshakable in the face of emotional storms becomes almost irresistibly attractive, precisely because he's proving that he doesn't need her validation to maintain his sense of self. But here's the question that might make you uncomfortable. How many of your relationships have been based on genuine choice versus emotional necessity? Think about that for a moment. Sartre's journals reveal that he tested this theory extensively, not just with Simone, but in his observations of couples throughout Paris. He noticed that relationships where the man was emotionally independent lasted longer, had less drama, and produced more genuine intimacy. The women in these relationships reported higher satisfaction, more respect for their partners, and ironically felt more secure despite being with men who clearly didn't need them. The paradox fascinated him. The less a man needed a woman, the safer she felt with him. The more emotionally independent he became, the more she trusted him with her vulnerability. It defied conventional wisdom, but made perfect psychological sense. When you don't need someone's presence to feel complete, you can actually see them clearly. You're not projecting your emotional needs onto them or trying to manipulate them into filling your psychological gaps. You can love them for who they are rather than what they do for your ego. This creates what Sartre called authentic intimacy, a connection based on genuine appreciation rather than emotional dependency. The woman feels free to be herself because she's not responsible for managing the man's emotional state. The man can express his feelings without the desperate undertone of neediness that often accompanies male vulnerability. But achieving this independence isn't easy, and Sartre was brutally honest about the process. It requires a man to face his deepest fears about abandonment, rejection, and loneliness. It means developing such a strong sense of self that external validation becomes irrelevant. It means building a life so fulfilling that a woman's presence enhances it rather than completes it. Sartre wrote extensively about what he called the dark night of the soul that every man must pass through to achieve true independence. It's the period where you stop seeking female approval and haven't yet developed genuine self-worth. You feel isolated, disconnected, and question whether you're making a terrible mistake. Most men, Sartre observed, can't handle this transition. They retreat back into patterns of neediness and validation seeking because the temporary discomfort of independence feels worse than the long-term prison of dependency. But those who persist discover something extraordinary. They become genuinely attractive for the first time in their lives. The attraction isn't based on what they can provide or how well they can meet a woman's needs. It's based on who they are as complete human beings. Women sense this wholeness and are drawn to it like moths to flame, not because they need it, but because they want to experience what it feels like to connect with someone who isn't trying, to complete themselves through the relationship. This brings us to another uncomfortable question. Are you someone worth choosing, or are you just someone who needs to be chosen? The difference will determine the quality of every relationship you ever have. Sartre's relationship with Simone became the laboratory for these ideas. They created a partnership based on intellectual stimulation, emotional independence, and genuine choice. Neither needed the other to feel complete, which paradoxically made their bond unbreakable. When other women pursued Sartre, Simone wasn't threatened because she knew he wasn't with her out of desperation. When other men showed interest in Simone, Sartre remained calm because he trusted her choice to be with him. Their relationship became a masterclass in what's possible when two people choose each other from abundance rather than scarcity. But the most shocking part of Sartre's discovery was how women responded to his emotional independence in social settings. He noticed that his indifference to female approval made him the center of attention at parties. Women who had previously ignored him suddenly wanted to engage in deep conversations. Those who had treated him as just another intellectual suddenly saw him as mysterious and compelling. The reason, he realized, was that most men in social settings are performing for female approval. They're telling stories to impress women, making jokes to get female laughter, and positioning themselves to be seen as valuable by the women present. This creates a subtle but pervasive energy of neediness that women unconsciously detect and find unattractive. When a man genuinely doesn't need this approval, when he's engaging in conversation because he finds it intellectually stimulating rather than because he's seeking validation, he stands out like a beacon. His presence becomes magnetic because he's the only one in the room who isn't performing for the female audience. This magnetic quality isn't about arrogance or aloofness. Sartre was careful to distinguish between genuine independence and defensive withdrawal. True independence allows for deep connection and vulnerability. It just doesn't depend on the other person's response to maintain its stability. The fear that independent men inspire in women isn't conscious or malicious. It's evolutionary and psychological. For thousands of years, women's survival depended on forming bonds with men who needed them enough to stay and provide protection. A man who genuinely doesn't need a woman triggers ancient fears about abandonment and security. But modern women, Sartre observed, are caught in a fascinating contradiction. Intellectually, they want partners who are confident and self-sufficient. Emotionally, they're drawn to men who make them feel needed and important. The result is the push-pull dynamic that characterizes many modern relationships, women simultaneously craving and resenting male independence. The men who understand this paradox, Sartre wrote, become masters of attraction not through manipulation, but through authentic self-development. They provide emotional security through their stability, while maintaining the excitement that comes from being with someone who chooses you every day, rather than someone who needs you to survive. Here's the final question that will reveal everything about your current relationship patterns. When you imagine yourself in a relationship, do you picture someone who completes you, or someone who complements an already complete person? Sartre's final insight was perhaps his most profound. The goal isn't to become emotionally unavailable or to stop caring about women. The goal is to develop such a rich, fulfilling life that a woman's presence adds to your happiness rather than creating it. When you achieve this, you become irresistibly attractive not because you're playing games, but because you're genuinely living a life worth sharing. The transformation isn't just about dating or relationships. It's about becoming the kind of person who creates value rather than consumes it, who offers abundance rather than demands it, who inspires admiration rather than requires it. This is what Sartre meant by authentic existence, living according to your own values and purposes rather than in reaction to others' expectations. Women fear men who don't need them because such men force them to confront their own need to be needed. They challenge women to bring more to the relationship than just their presence. They demand that women show up as complete individuals rather than as emotional caretakers or validation dispensers. This fear, Sartre realized, is actually a gift. It forces both people in the relationship to become better versions of themselves. The woman must develop her own independence and self-worth. The man must prove that his choice to be with her is based on genuine appreciation rather than desperate need. The result is a relationship between two whole people who enhance each other's lives rather than complete them. It's a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine attraction, and continuous choice rather than habit, fear, or social obligation. Sartre spent his final years refining these ideas, always using his relationship with Simone as the testing ground. Even as they aged, even as their physical attraction diminished, their intellectual and emotional connection remained strong because it was based on choice rather than need. When Sartre died in 1980, over 50,000 people attended his funeral. But Simone was there not as his dependent widow, but as his intellectual equal and chosen partner. She had been with him for over 40 years, not because she needed him, but because she chose him every single day. The lesson isn't that you should become cold or distant. It's that you should become so fulfilled, so purposeful, so genuinely confident that a woman's presence in your life is a beautiful addition rather than a necessary completion. When you achieve this, you'll discover what Sartre knew. Being chosen by someone who doesn't need you is the most powerful form of love possible. If this story has opened your eyes to patterns in your own relationships, if you recognize the difference between being needed and being chosen, then I need you to take action right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we're going to explore more hidden truths about attraction, power, and authentic relationships that society doesn't want you to understand. Like this video if you've ever felt the suffocating weight of being someone's emotional crutch, or if you've experienced the freedom that comes from being genuinely chosen. And in the comments below, share your honest answer. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt more like an emotional necessity than a genuine choice? Remember, the goal isn't to become emotionally unavailable. It's to become so emotionally fulfilled that you can offer genuine love without the desperate undertone of neediness. It's to become someone worth choosing rather than someone who needs to be chosen. Your journey to authentic independence starts with a single decision. Will you continue seeking relationships to complete yourself? Or will you complete yourself and then share that wholeness with someone who appreciates it? The choice, as Sartre would say, is always yours to make.